Welcome to StatScope. Today we're going to dive into a really important and emotional topic. Whether we want to admit it or not, it's a topic that affects the lives of millions, perhaps even billions, of people around the world. I'm talking about racism. And in this discussion, we're going to look at the 10 countries that, according to many reports, research findings and statistical analyses, are most affected by racism. It is a problem that has left deep scars on the social consciousness of the nations concerned. It is important to remember that each country and each person in it has a unique history, social context, and cultural background. These shape how racism finds expression in each country. Therefore, we are not trying to make a definitive judgment or condemn it here. Our aim is to shed light on the complex and multifaceted nature of racism as it exists today. Number 10. There has been a recent upsurge in racism in Italy, with African migrants and the Roma community being the most affected. This increase in racial hostility is not just the result of a few isolated incidents. It is a broader trend that we see across the country, in the form of an increase in hate crimes, discriminatory policies, and social exclusion. The situation, exacerbated by the rise of nationalist and far-right groups, has led to much greater racial tension, making prejudice and intolerance more visible and widespread than ever before. The rise of these ideas has not only given more confidence to people with racist beliefs, but has also influenced how public debates and policies are shaped, leading to the targeting and exclusion of minority communities. This worrying change shows that we need to work together to tackle the growing racial tensions in Italy. It is important to create an inclusive society that ends division and discrimination. Seeing racism in Italy today shows us that marginalized communities still have a lot to fight for. We must make things better for them. Number 9. Japan is often seen as a country where everyone is the same, but it's actually facing a lot of racism, especially against its ethnic minorities, including Koreans, Chinese, and the indigenous Ainu people. Even though Japan seems like a pretty unified country on the outside, discrimination against these groups is still a big problem. It shows up in lots of different ways that are subtle but still pretty common. This racism often shows up as social exclusion, where people from these minority groups end up on the outside, isolated from broader societal interactions. In the workplace, there are some pretty obvious biases, which lead to unequal opportunities and treatment that really hold them back from developing professionally and personally. What's more, these communities often have very limited access to essential services, which makes things even harder for them and keeps them at a disadvantage. Even foreigners living in Japan can be affected by racism and xenophobia, which highlights the need for a more inclusive and accepting society. The difficulties these groups face show there's a big gap between Japan's image and the reality for people who don't fit its usual cultural norms. We need to work together to make things more inclusive, to understand each other better, and to respect diversity. That way, everyone in Japanese society will have equal opportunities and treatment, regardless of their background. Number 8. Saudi Arabia's treatment of migrant workers, particularly from South Asia and Africa, has recently come under intense scrutiny and criticism. This has revealed a striking and disturbing picture of exploitation and systematic racism. These workers are vital to the national economy, but they are often forced to endure harsh and inhumane conditions. They do not have much legal protection, and there is a lot of discrimination that really undermines their dignity and well-being. The lack of proper protection and the fact that exploitative practices are so widespread paints a rather grim picture of the migrant worker experience in Saudi Arabia. On top of this, the country's deep-rooted preference for light skin color exacerbates these problems. This reinforces a racial hierarchy that perpetuates social inequality and entrenches systemic racism into the fabric of the country. This shows how unequal the situation is for migrant workers and reflects broader attitudes that allow discrimination to continue and make it harder to achieve social equality and justice. As Saudi Arabia continues to confront these issues, it is clear that comprehensive reforms and a major shift in attitudes are needed to address the deep-rooted racial and social inequalities that exist in the country. Number 7. In Australia, the situation of the indigenous Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples is a worrying example of long-standing marginalisation and systematic discrimination that is still affecting these communities in a big way. These groups were the original inhabitants of the land, but they've historically faced and continue to endure pervasive exclusion and prejudice that manifests in various detrimental ways. This deep-rooted racism is clearly seen in the big differences they face in important areas like health, education, and job opportunities. These differences not only show, but also keep their social and economic disadvantages going. Despite some good work by the Australian government and various organisations to tackle these issues and promote reconciliation, there's still a long way to go before we see real equality and a meaningful resolution. The struggle for true reconciliation is an ongoing and challenging one. It shows just how deep-rooted the issues are and how complex it is to make real and lasting change. This ongoing journey shows us that we need to keep up our commitment, have comprehensive strategies, and be sincere in our efforts to bridge the gap and address the lasting impact of historical injustices on the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Number 6. Brazil, often celebrated for its vibrant cultural diversity and colorful tapestry of traditions, continues to confront deeply rooted and pervasive racial issues that belie its outwardly multicultural image. Despite the country's rich mosaic of ethnic backgrounds and its international reputation for inclusivity, significant racial disparities persist, especially affecting Afro-Brazilians and indigenous peoples. The stark reality is that these communities face systemic inequalities across various facets of life, including education, employment, and the justice system. Afro-Brazilians, in particular, bear the brunt of these disparities, encountering disproportionately high levels of poverty, violence, and discrimination. This systemic inequality is not merely a reflection of isolated incidents, but rather a profound and entrenched issue that underscores the pervasive nature of racism within Brazilian society. The challenges faced by these communities paint a troubling picture of how deeply ingrained racial prejudices continue to shape their lives, despite the nation's multicultural veneer. As Brazil grapples with these issues, the ongoing struggle to achieve true social justice and equality highlights the urgent need for a comprehensive and sincere effort to address the deep-seated roots of racism that continue to undermine the nation's aspirations for equity and inclusion. Number 5. South Africa, which emerged from the shadows of apartheid with high hopes for a new era of equality and justice, is still dealing with the deep and lasting impact of racial inequality that was so deeply ingrained in its history. Although apartheid was officially dismantled in 1994, the effects of this brutal system are still felt today. They have left a complex and painful imprint on the fabric of South African society. The effects of this institutionalized racism are still very visible today, with many black South Africans being hit hardest by poverty and a lack of access to opportunities. Social tensions are still there too, and they often lead to racial violence, which shows how unstable the situation is. This ongoing effort to address and heal from the wounds caused by decades of systemic oppression shows how deeply the effects of apartheid continue to affect South Africa. They influence not only the socio-economic landscape, but also the daily lives and interactions of South Africa's diverse population. The country is constantly working to overcome these challenges and build a fairer society. This shows how difficult it is to achieve genuine reconciliation and justice. This is still important to understand and address the deep-rooted issues that still exist long after the official end of apartheid. Number 4. Russia is a huge country with a pretty complicated and troubled history. When it comes to how it treats ethnic minorities, especially those from Central Asia and the Caucasus region, it doesn't look good. In cities like Moscow, these individuals often find themselves at the sharp end of intense discrimination and hate crimes. Just for being a person of non-Slavic descent, they can become targets for brutal and senseless violence. These attacks are becoming more and more common, and they're not just hurting the victims physically and emotionally. They're also contributing to a broader sense of social unrest, which is making the atmosphere in many urban centers even more volatile. The rise of nationalist groups, which actively stoke the flames of xenophobia and intolerance, has only served to further inflame these tensions, creating a hostile and dangerous environment for migrants and ethnic minorities who are simply trying to carve out a life for themselves in a country that often seems to view them with suspicion and disdain. The daily challenges these people face, whether it's in the form of verbal abuse, physical assault, or systemic exclusion from opportunities, paint a stark picture of ongoing racial hostility, one that highlights the deeply ingrained prejudices that continue to plague Russian society. This shows how hard it is to live as an outsider in a country where nationalism is often more important than human rights. It also makes us think about what will happen to ethnic relations in Russia. Russia is still dealing with the past while trying to find its place in the modern world. Number 3. China is a country that's known for modernizing fast and having an influence on the global stage. But the situation for ethnic minorities like Uyghur Muslims and Tibetans shows a stark and worrying reality. It's a situation that's led by the state and is both common and a cause for concern. These communities have been struggling for a long time to keep their unique cultural identities and ways of life alive. Now, they're facing not only severe discrimination but also government policies that are forcing them to assimilate culturally. These policies, often enforced with brutal efficiency, include reports of mass internment camps where it is said that countless Uyghurs are detained under the guise of re-education. The Chinese government says these actions are necessary to combat terrorism and maintain national security, but the global community has condemned them as some of the worst human rights violations of our time. The struggles endured by these communities, who are marginalized and stripped of their cultural heritage, serve as a painful reminder of the harsh realities faced by those on the periphery of society. They are isolated, oppressed, and fighting to hold on to their identities in the face of overwhelming adversity. This situation shows how much these minority groups are suffering, and it also shows how there is still a lot of tension between the state and individual rights. It makes us think about what it means to have national unity, and what justice really means in a world that is changing fast. Number 2, the United States is a nation that prides itself on being a melting pot of cultures and backgrounds, but it also has a heavy and often painful legacy of racism. This legacy is so deeply embedded in its history that it has shaped the experiences of African Americans, Native Americans, and countless other minority groups in profound and indelible ways. These groups have faced not only overt discrimination, but also systemic injustices that have marginalized them at every turn. While the country has made great strides in civil rights and social progress, we still have a long way to go. Issues like police brutality, which often targets African Americans, and racial disparities in the justice system affect many people's lives, casting doubt on the nation's claims of equality and justice for all. Despite the ongoing challenges, the United States is a shining example of resistance. It's a place where powerful and resilient movements have emerged, driven by a deep-seated determination to fight racism and push for true equality. These efforts show that the nation is still committed to overcoming its troubled past. They also show that people believe a better future is possible, one that treats everyone equally regardless of race or background. Number 1. India is a country with a rich and varied culture and a huge range of ethnic groups. For as long as anyone can remember, it has had to deal with the harsh reality of racism, which has been linked to its ancient and inflexible caste system. This system has been in place for centuries and has created an unfair social structure. The Dalits, who have historically been at the very bottom of this social order, have faced the brunt of systemic discrimination. They have not just been socially excluded, but also economically, educationally, and even physically marginalized, and this has persisted relentlessly through the ages. Despite some recent progress towards equality and social justice, the effects of this long-standing prejudice are still felt in both rural areas and urban centers. Here, caste-based discrimination is combined with social class issues and a preference for lighter skin tones, creating a complex web of discrimination that modern Indian society is still trying to untangle.